So, like most artists, I feel massively underwhelmed by my own art on occasions, and I had a super interesting conversation with some fellow artists the other day. They are a mixture of amateur, professional, all pretty successful artists in their own way, but they too sometimes really hate their own art, and even their own style of art. So, why is this? Why do we hate our own art? Well, one of the reasons could be over-familiarity. You've lived with your mark making style and your handwriting and your drawing style your whole life. I think formative experiences in drawing and mark making can really put adults off taking up art as a hobby. The amount of people who say, I can't draw, when that's not a prerequisite when it comes to actually doing art or mark making. You don't have to be able to draw. You just have to have the ability to be able to hold a pencil, hold a brush. Like everything in our lives that we live with on a daily basis, whether it's our partners or our style of cooking, dancing, or whatever, we kind of take these things for granted and we don't actually appreciate, perhaps as much as we should, the very uniqueness of our own styles. So as well as over familiarity, could it be that we're looking at social media for valuation? Posting your art on social media is a great way to remain accountable because it means you regularly post and practice. It's also a great way of making what can be quite a solitary hobby into a bit more of a community. But that said, you should never equate the amount of likes you get with the value of your art. Social media loves it when people stick to a niche. I see artists on Instagram who do the same style of drawing again and again and again and have 100,000 followers because Instagram loves consistency. I'm not saying they're bad artists at all, but what I'm saying is being a success on Instagram is not analogous to how much pleasure you get from your artwork at all. Social media is a great way of connecting with other artists and getting inspiration, but it certainly shouldn't be used as a exterior locus of evaluation because, ultimately likes are just likes. You shouldn't ever confuse how many likes you get for your artwork with the value of it. There is an element of creating art for other people, by using social media, but another question is, are you forgetting the simple pleasure of just doing art for you? When you sit down and you start drawing and sketching and planning a piece, there is a wonderful, relaxing space you can fall into. We all live stressful lives, and forgetting about targets and performance and the need ultimately to be there for your partners, children, whoever. This is a really selfless time when you can sit down and actually just really enjoy the process. And if you're kind and brave enough to create the space for yourself, have a play and have fun, then you're really winning. And actually positively discourage anyone who's trying to learn a new skill, whether it's watercolours or pastels or lots of things that I can't do. I would literally discourage you from finishing a piece because I think this can be quite a pressure, certainly initially. When I was using watercolours and learning how to paint seas, I wanted to sort of understand dry brush and wet in wet techniques. And all I did is I'd take a big sheet of paper, I'd divide it up into 8 tiny squares and just actually play, trying different things in each. Not try and incorporate a sea into a main drawing, just concentrate on a sea element. And it's the same if you're learning how to do trees or whatever, just concentrate on the leaves and do, 12 big bushy trees really super quick. Because the pressure of actually creating a finished piece can kind of get in the way of just that play and that free learning experience. That sort of free play is really the fastest way to learn anything in art, I believe. I think the process itself is a pleasure without the need really for completing something. So as we're on the subject of processes, could it be that you feel you're making mistakes? And do your mistakes spoil your art? Mistakes can be hugely frustrating. I remember ruining a perfectly good commission by removing the masking tape from the paper and it tearing right across. But there's 2 ways you can look at this. You can look at this as an opportunity to beat yourself up, or you can look at this as a massive learning nugget. This is something that you will not do again, or if you do, you'll only do it once more. Big mistakes tend to lead to big learning lessons. I think it's really important to view mistakes as a vital part of the learning process. It could be perhaps argued that if you're not making enough mistakes in your art, then you're not really being brave enough. Because art is a space in life where you can try new things, you can experiment, you can push yourself. So this brings me to the next question. Are you just bored with your process? It's easy to get comfortable in a process when you're used to it, whether it's using a certain technique or certain materials. In time, your confidence grows, and actually often your desire to create can wane. Sometimes trying new media and techniques or tackling new subjects can really help with this. And it can certainly help to get you back on the steep and often the most fun side of the learning curve. So we've talked about mistakes and we've talked about the view of our art, but I think part of that really has to do with the way that we talk to ourselves about our own art. So is your negative self-talk ruining your enjoyment of your art? Imagine a child learning to ride a bike, and every time they slip on the pedal or take a tumble, a parent criticises them and says, "You'll never be able to ride a bike again, you're clumsy, you're no use, you've got no coordination." Well, I can't imagine that child really wanting to ride that bike very much, or really having any sort of healthy associations with cycling. Well, negative self-talk does that to your enjoyment of your own art, really. It can slowly suck all the life and joy out of it, until you don't really want to pick up a pencil or a pen. I'm sure all of you in your own lives, when you've been learning a new skill or a new job, have had to take criticism from other people. And that's part of the learning process. That's part of being mentored. But really doubling down on your own negative self-talk doesn't really help. Obviously, this is a huge subject. And I think ultimately this might be a video in its own right one day. But I'll tell you a little secret. No, they didn't teach you this when you were younger. It's okay to be proud of yourself. You don't have to be big-headed or arrogant, but why not acknowledge progress when you make it? There's been lots of research done into how negative self-talk can affect our lives. A 4-year study showed that people who had repetitive negative thoughts experienced greater levels of cognitive decline. But actually, I see it as more as a grading process. And what I mean by that is, like, if you were to assess a piece of work or a session where you sit down and you do some art, you sort of give yourself a grade, okay? So you get 1 grade for starting, you get 1 mark for starting, because often starting is the hardest thing you can do. Mark 2 is for deciding what to do, because again, that can be quite a hard thing for when you sit down to draw or paint or sculpt or whatever. What's your subject going to be? I think you'll get a bonus mark if you finish a piece, even though halfway through you think it's rubbish. Sometimes, despite what I was saying before about working on finished pieces, sometimes if you are going to bring a piece to a conclusion, if halfway through you realise that something's not quite right on it, completing it can be quite hard. But often by that point, you can kind of throw caution to the wind and do some quite expressive things, because essentially that piece isn't going to be finished the way you wanted it to be. So why not try something different with it? Why not take that as an opportunity to push yourself outside of your envelope? So people who follow these videos will know that I often talk about leaving a piece of art to prove. And by that I mean stick it on a shelf or in a drawer for 24, 48 hours, and then look back at it then. Assess what works, what doesn't, and there's always positives and negatives in pieces. As we've already said, mistakes are little learning nuggets that are really important in the process of learning a new skill. Personally, I actually think this is really applicable in lots of walks of life. You just have to talk to yourself like you would a really close friend, a partner, your wife, your husband, or as you would a child. If your child came to you and said, as my kids do all the time, "Daddy, what do you think of this?" I have to actually, first of all, say, well done for doing something. The fact that you've taken the time to create something, marvellous. But then I will genuinely look at it and say, oh, I love that, I love that, I love that. And then because they're kids, I won't go, but you could try harder with that, you could try harder with that. But what I might try and say is, maybe next time you could try and do this or do that. It's just a case of using a kind voice on yourself, basically. And it's been said by more intelligent minds than me that, some days you can score your day like that. If you're having a really tough time or you suffer from depression, getting out of bed, 1 mark, making your bed, that's another mark. And sometimes just those simple little processes and little moments of gratitude can really help. So back to something I think we can all relate to, and that's comparison. So, do you dislike your own art because you're comparing yourself to others? I think it was Teddy Roosevelt that said comparison is the thief of joy. But I think what I mean by joy is sort of losing yourself in the process. I think with social media, again, it's easy to look at other artists and in comparison to feel, well, just less. But I think for me, it's a case of thinking about why we actually create our own art. Do we want to impress other people? Do we want to look cool? And make it seem like we are sort of creative people? Well, as you know, I see an art practice as something that people very much do for themselves because, frankly, it keeps you sane. So when I see other people's art that really speaks to me, whether it's the mark-making style or the painting or whatever, I think it's okay to steal that. I think it's okay to steal some elements of that. Have a play with the way they make marks, steal a painting style. Mimicking a fellow artist is really important way to learn, but use their style as a sort of springboard rather than just copying verbatim. The fact is that, there is other people's art that we look at and we think, oh, I like that, it's really bold, it's really colourful, whatever style that they're using, and we can tap into that. But the one thing we have is we have a unique style, we have a unique language, all of our own. And part of coming to terms with, part of developing our own language as artists is not only about taking influences from other people, but it's actually about learning to appreciate and develop our own sort of unique style and voice. So whenever I pick up a new media or I try and paint a new style or even pick up a new piece of equipment in my professional life, I can get very frustrated that, I make some big mistakes. But in case of our art practice, is it that our expectations are just too high? Now, there's never really been a better time to get into art in a way, because whether it's digital, AI, or oil painting, lino cuts, whatever it is, there is millions of tutorials at our fingertips. And one of the problems with these tutorials are they're often pretty much centered around, 5 great tips for the perfect self-portrait or how to draw anything in 2 easy steps or those sort of videos. And yes, I know the irony here because I do create videos like that. But what they don't really encapsulate, because it's a universal truth, is that all crafts, all skills need time to develop. Now, often the learning curve is not linear. It certainly isn't exponential. Often what it does is it's stepped. And by that I mean, when you're learning a skill, there will be times when you'll reach a point of resistance that you can't get beyond. And then you can just focus on that tiny bit and then you'll pop up and you'll level up. And sometimes you can plateau for a good lump of time before you step up to the next level. And this can be frustrating. YouTube is truly wonderful for finding out how to change the filter on a washing machine in a way, but an art practice is a lifelong thing. It slowly changes and evolves. There is no way, I know I've said this before, but there's no way to complete art. There's no game over, end credits. It's a process of sort of playing, refining, and so managing your expectations, I think, is important. And I actually think, keeping the steps tiny and small really help, but regular. Now, I've been trying to develop my techniques for drawing figures and faces over the last few months, and I have a little sketchbook, and I will just every single day, sit down, get a cup of coffee, and just do 10 minutes in that sketchbook. And I make sure that every day, at some point, even if it's 9 o'clock at night and I'm watching telly, I will just put a sketch in that sketchbook. And I think I'm learning faster than if I did like 3 hours over a weekend, where there's a lot of pressure on me to make sure it's right in those 3 hours. And then, of course, the kids you get interrupted because of one thing or another, whether it's the dog or the children or whatever. 10 minutes, whereas 10 minutes a day is realistically possible. So watch that, mind the gap in terms of your expectations and reality, and know that really just some good things just take time. So in conclusion, right, I'll ask myself, why do I hate my art? And now I can tell you. I forget that I'm over familiar with my style, and maybe it's time to shake things up a little bit. Or maybe I forget that I spend too much time posting and comparing myself on social media to other artists and wondering why I don't have 1 million likes, rather than actually sitting down and actually making art. And maybe it's that I'm afraid, or maybe I'm just fatigued of making mistakes. Although I do know that mistakes can be part of the learning process, it can be tiring if you keep trying something and you feel you're not matching your own expectations. Or maybe I don't like my own art because I'm simply forgetting the actual joy of doing and realising that the end result is kind of irrelevant when it comes to giving yourself that time out space just to have fun. Being bored of your process is really no excuse when it comes to, not trying new media and not trying new techniques. So why do you think you can't draw when you've got no talent? Could it be that it's your negative self-talk? Could it be that the last piece of art you did was actually full of amazing bits, but all you can see is that one mistake you made? And as I said before, that's the bit you should be really thankful for. Or is it that your expectations mean that if you try it 3 times and it just doesn't work out, you say, well, screw it, and give up? Learning takes time. And that's why the good Lord gave us sketchbooks, so we can look back over the years and see how far we've come. So I know this has been a bit of a weird one in terms of it being an absolute self-indulgent monologue, but I am just trying to try some new things with this channel, and I'm not really sure what I want it to be in terms of the sort of structure of it. So I'm playing and I'm experimenting. So this piece of artwork is about done. So let's have a little look about how I feel about it. Do I hate it? Well, let's go back to that grading process I was talking about earlier, and how it's a nice way of viewing your own art. So if I was to give myself some sort of bonus marks here, a pat on the back. First of all, did I start it? Yes, I started a drawing. Woo! Did I finish it? Yeah, kind of got to a point where I think, it's kind of done. Did I enjoy it? Yeah, I really did enjoy doing this one. It's the first time I've done any what I would call proper painting in a while. A couple of weeks because of Christmas and New Year. I have enjoyed using some of my skills that I haven't used in a few weeks, getting the paints out and having a play. I'm not really a fan of the line work in this drawing necessarily. I think it looks a bit flat. But that's just a general style thing. The overall feel in this drawing is a bit twee for me, but there's been some really good learning points. I think one of the learning points from this is, even though in the reference picture some of the houses are a bit wonky, when I've sketched them in, I've probably accentuated the wonkiness, and I think that can look like a mistake in a drawing. So I think construction is important, not necessarily so that you get the drawing looking as accurately like the photo, because I don't think that's that relevant in a way, but I think construction is important so that you don't look like you're making mistakes within the drawing. And again, that's just a personal thing. Some people love wobbly lines. Some people will go all Picasso on it. So yeah, they are some of the learning points I'm taking from it. This drawing is not an assessment of me as an artist. This is not an encapsulation of everything I am. This is just a tiny stepping stone in what will hopefully be, a long lifetime of many, many different drawings. It's full of good bits, and it's full of little learning points, mistakes. But life's like that, and that's what makes it so sort of juicy and fun, really. Okay, so I need to fess up. This is a long video of me just monologuing, and I want to say a huge thanks to all of you brave souls who have helped me paddle my nonsense canoe down this particular stream of consciousness. I hope you got something from this, and I wish you all joyful pleasure in your mistakes and experiments. The other thing I'll finish by saying is, when we're doing all of these processes, whether we're doing sculpture or drawing or printing or whatever our particular discipline is, just remember it's not brain surgery. It's not air traffic controlled. No one dies. It's just paper.